Well, hello, my name is Dr.Yus. I belong to a research group called UNED, and I'm going to talk to you about irony and emotions, which is the module 5, part 1. And I'm going to provide you with my approach to communication, what role emotions and feelings play in irony comprehension and irony communication. And I start off with my perspective to linguistics and pragmatics, in which basically it is problematized that utterances and sentences have a unique meaning. Basically, in pragmatics, we are interested in the difference between what people say and what people really want to communicate. There is always a difference between what we produce in words and what we actually intend, and there is also a gap between what people listen to or people read and what they actually interpret. And irony is a typical example of that, because in irony we don't normally want to communicate literally what we're saying. We want to communicate sometimes opposite things, sometimes slightly different things. So just as an introduction, remind you that we can communicate things explicitly or as implications or implicatures. An example that you have in that slide is this micro conversation. Would you like a beer? I'm a Muslim. Obviously, I'm a Muslim communicates explicitly. I belong to the Muslim religion, but obviously that's not the answer to the question. What we want to, what B wants to communicate is something like, I don't want a beer because Muslims do not drink alcohol, and beer is an alcoholic drink. So we need a lot of contextualization. We don't simply listen to people, listen to the words and get straightforward interpretations. We need contextualization. And that's typical of explicit communication. Now there's a traditional view of literalness in which we always interpret literally what we are said, and as you can see in the slide, very often we don't interpret what we are told, even in an explicit way. Somebody says, I've got nothing to wear for the party, and we interpret nothing elegant, nothing appropriate. Somebody says, Antonio or John drinks a lot, and we interpret John drinks alcohol a lot. So we don't really interpret things literally. Irony is an example of that. And feelings and emotions are particularly interesting, and pragmatics, linguistics has not been so good at dealing with them, because they are not, as easy to pin down in terms of interpretations. Very often we don't really have a unique, clear interpretation of the feelings and emotions that the person has when producing some content, some behavior. And you've got an example in that slide in which Mary and Peter are at the seaside, and she's, she opens the window and sniffs appreciatively, and there's a lot of information that she may intend to communicate with this behavior, some feelings and emotions about being at the seaside, the air, the seaweed, the ozone, the pleasant things, etc. But there is no real interpretation that perhaps comes to mind, and it's really difficult sometimes to get the interpretation. So feelings and emotions, in my opinion, they are crucial for interpreting people correctly. I label feelings and emotions under the umbrella term of affective attitude. And it should be an appropriate object of research for pragmatics, and it hasn't been tackled so much, and that's why UNED project is doing such a good job in bringing emotions and feelings into the forefront of analysis. And so when we deal with ironical communication, we will see that feelings and emotions are essential to really get the intended interpretation appropriately, and we will see that in a number of examples. So in this module, we will focus on feelings, emotions which are intended to be interpreted during ironical communication, and we will not deal with unintentionally produced feelings and emotions, which are obviously also part of human behavior, even during communication, but they should not be tackled by pragmatics, which normally addresses intentional activity. Okay, so feelings and emotions are not only important when we speak, but also the hearer's feelings and emotions are also very important. And you've got in this slide an example of how the addressee, the hearer's feelings and emotions also play a part in the eventual interpretation. You got this micro dialogue. A man and a woman are expecting his family for dinner, and she's trying to tidy up the dining room. Depending on how messy the room is and how much time she has to tidy it, she will have either positive or negative feelings upon having to do so. Then her husband turns up and he says, "I've put the white wine in the fridge." So in this example, if the woman, the wife, has positive feelings about tidying up, she's not angry, for example, she will infer or she will implicate, that's the term we usually use in pragmatics, that he's trying to be helpful, contribute to the organization of the dinner, implications which are based on information such as the one you have in 3A, B, C, D. White wine should be served cold. To serve white wine cold, it's necessary to put it in the fridge. One who remembers to put the wine in the fridge is helpful, or drinking warm wine can spoil the dinner. However, if she's angry, she's not. She's in a different mood, angry at having to tidy up the room without much time left. She will get implications that he's trying to rush her, or complaining that she's not willing to tidy up, and all based on a different number of premises, such as the one you've got in 4AD in that slide. Putting wine in the fridge is essential, cleaning the dining room is not essential, etc., etc. So the hearer's feelings and emotions also play a part in the eventual interpretation, not only the intended feelings and emotions that the speaker produces. Now, with irony, we've got a very interesting object of research, because with irony, traditionally it's been said that irony communicates the opposite of what is said, which is not true. With ironies, we can communicate a whole range of interpretations which differ to a greater or lesser extent from what is actually said. And you've got an example in that slide. Jane said to Anne this morning that it was fine to go to the beach since she was sure that it would not rain. As they arrive at the beach, it starts pouring down. So 2A would be the typical ironical remark, what fine weather we're having. But we can also communicate different shades of differences in terms of what we want to communicate, such as 2B, it seems to be raining, or even be ironical by using a true statement like it's pouring down. So the good idea, the good thing about irony is that we are not obsessed with the content. We are more interested in communicating the attitude that we have towards what we're saying. So the important thing is that there is something, some event, some expectation, some norm that was supposed to happen and did not happen as expected. Okay, and you've got 3 examples in that slide. So when the son loses 6-0, 6-0 in a tennis match, and the father says, "Congratulations, you played a great match." Well, the son knows he didn't play a good match, so that's pretty obvious. So why say the opposite of that? Well, the actual interpretation is that the important thing about this ironical statement is not to communicate the opposite, but to communicate that the father had expectations that the son would play well, which were unfounded. The same with 2. After a horrible job interview, the candidate says, "That went well." Again, we have a pretty obvious case in which the interlocutor probably knows that the interview didn't go well. But the important thing about this is that the speaker wants to communicate that she had expectations that the interview would go well, that were unfounded, that eventually were unfulfilled. And finally, in 3, the girlfriend says, "You're a real gentleman," when he has behaved utterly impolitely. Again, he knows that he hasn't behaved politely. So why say the opposite? Again, in this case, the important thing is the communication of a negative attitude towards something that should have happened and eventually didn't turn out as expected. So the interesting thing for emotions, feelings, and irony is the fact that ironies are not always critical. considering the idea that irony entails a negative attitude towards something that didn't go as expected, that some norm that was not followed, some event that was not successful, it should be curious to find out that some ironies are actually praising, some ironies are humorous, some ironies are not offensive. So why is that possible? And the answer, in my opinion, is that we have to bring into the picture in the identification of the speaker's feelings and emotions. So what makes an irony humorous or praising or critical is not only the identification of this negative attitude I was talking about, but also the identification of the speaker's feelings and emotions while producing the irony. So the idea is that we can have the same utterance, the same ironical utterance with the same negative attitude, and still have a whole range of different feelings and emotions attached to that negative attitude, so that the eventual interpretation is either utterly offensive, as in sarcasm, or mildly offensive, or praising, or even humorous, as might also be the case. So finally, we just to provide an example of how this is the case, we have the same dialogue in 3 different versions, and how the same irony, the same ironical utterance with the same negative attitude can nevertheless provide 3 different interpretations. In the first one, we have the situation in which John calls Mary on the phone, and Mary says, "Hi, John, how are things?" And John says, "I'm fine. I've just thought, since Mary is always calling me, today, for a change, I'll make the call." And she starts laughing. "Poor thing, you're right. I should call you more often, but you seem so happy to call your friend, don't you?" And John is also laughing. "Of course, Mary, a pleasure." So in this case, John is not happy, in theory, that he's the one who has to make all the calls, the one who always has to take the responsibility of calling her. But even though he thinks it would be nice that Mary called him more often, the feelings and emotions attached to his irony or his ironical remark are on the positive side, and Mary infers the attitude correctly. The whole conversation is tinged with humor and amusement. Now consider this variation in the dialogue. We have the same initial part of the dialogue, and then Mary says, "I'm sorry, I do call you every now and then. Don't be so angry." And John says, "Yeah, once a year, more or less. I just think I deserve better." So we have the same conversation, and the same ironical remark, but for some reason, Mary infers that he's angry, and the interpretation goes a whole different path. So even though John has produced the same utterance, John has the same negative attitude to the fact that he has to call her all the time. The feelings and emotions that he holds are on the negative side. Mary, again, correctly interprets the point of the irony and infers that the feelings associated with this echo or this referent are negative. John is angry at being the one who calls her all the time, and she reacts in a different way from the previous example, in which John was having a more positive, humorous feelings and emotions. And the last one is a same variation, the same dialogue. In this case, Mary reacts as if he was holding positive, humorous feelings, and then he says, "Actually, I'm pissed off with having to call you all the time. You could make the effort to call me, couldn't you?" And Mary suddenly says, "I'm sorry, don't be so angry. I never thought you'd be so upset." So in this case, we have a misunderstanding in which Mary thinks he's having a humorous, positive feelings and emotions associated with the ironical remark, when actually he's very angry. So notice how different the interpretations go depending on the identification of the feelings and emotions associated with the speaker's utterance. So to conclude, the analysis indicates that there is no guaranteed interpretation. That's roughly what pragmatics says in general. When interpreting other people, we have to work out what they really mean when they produce a message. Interpretations differ to a greater or lesser extent from what has literally been said. And concerning feelings and emotions and irony, attention must be paid to what is really at stake when a person intends an interpretation. For example, in ironies, especially in contexts such as the workplace, where subtle differences in underlying feelings and emotions could or may result in radically different interpretations. This will be of particular interest to those workers, for example, working wanting to pin down their managers' feelings and emotions when they produce ironies at work. So the point of this module is to remind you that it's not only important to get the point of the utterances, which, as I said, differ more or less from what is literally produced in words, but also to pin down the feelings and emotions which could lead interpretations in radically different ways. Thank you.